Have you ever wondered what terror looks like through the eyes of those who believe themselves invincible? What happens when the most disciplined military mind in history encounters a force so primal, so impossibly skilled, that every rule of warfare they knew simply crumbled to dust? Before we reveal what was hidden in those forbidden pages, we need your help. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This channel exists because of viewers like you who believe these stories must be told. Hit that subscribe button now. We're fighting against algorithms that want to bury this content, and we need your support to keep bringing you these declassified accounts that others don't want you to hear. The autumn of 1843 brought an unusual visitor to the wind-swept plains of western Texas. Heinrich von Rothenburg, a Prussian military observer and decorated cavalry officer, had traveled nearly 5,000 miles from Berlin with a singular mission: to document the American frontier and assess whether the fledgling republic's military forces posed any strategic concern to European powers. His journals, written in meticulous Gothic script, would remain sealed in a private collection in Munich for over 170 years. What they contained would challenge everything historians thought they knew about the Comanche Empire and the men who tried to fight them. Von Rothenburg arrived at Fort Martin Scott near Fredericksburg in late October, carrying letters of introduction from the Prussian military attaché in Washington. The fort's commander, Colonel James Harrison, welcomed the foreign observer with cautious hospitality. Harrison had served on the frontier for 6 years and had learned to measure his words carefully when discussing the Comanche. In his official correspondence, he referred to them as hostiles or raiders. In private, he called them ghosts. The German officer's first entry about the Comanche came 3 days after his arrival. He wrote with the clinical detachment of a man trained to assess enemy capabilities without emotion. The local indigenous warriors known as Comanche are reported to control approximately 240,000 square miles of territory, from the Arkansas River to the Mexican interior. Initial assessments suggest a loosely organized force of mounted raiders, perhaps 3,000 to 4,000 fighting men, employing guerrilla tactics against scattered settlements. Preliminary evaluation indicates no significant threat to properly trained and equipped European forces. Von Rothenburg would revise this assessment within a week. On November 2nd, a Comanche raiding party struck a supply wagon 15 miles south of the fort. By the time soldiers arrived at the scene, the attackers had vanished into the limestone hills, leaving behind a tableau that made hardened frontiersmen go pale. The wagons had been stripped of every useful item down to the wheel hubs. The teamsters' bodies had been arranged in a pattern that von Rothenburg initially thought was random, until a translator explained it was a warning written in a symbolic language the Comanche used to communicate with other bands. The German officer accompanied the recovery detail, and that night he wrote an entry that differed markedly in tone from his earlier assessments. "I have witnessed battlefields from Saxony to Silesia, seen what disciplined artillery does to cavalry charges, watched infantry squares hold against overwhelming numbers. What I saw today was neither battle nor raid. It was a surgical demonstration of absolute dominance. These warriors did not simply attack. They orchestrated. Every wound placement, every missing item, every hoof print in the dust spoke of such complete control of the engagement that our men never had a moment when resistance was even possible. I am beginning to understand why Colonel Harrison chooses his words so carefully." The following weeks brought von Rothenburg deeper into the reality of Comanche warfare. He interviewed soldiers, settlers, Texas Rangers, and Mexican vaqueros who had survived encounters with the mounted warriors. Each conversation added layers to his understanding, and each layer made his Prussian military training seem increasingly inadequate for the challenges of this strange frontier. A ranger named Thomas McClure told him about a skirmish near the Llano River. We had 20 men, all experienced fighters, armed with Colt revolvers and rifles. We were moving through a valley when we realized they were all around us. 50, maybe 60 warriors. But here's what your European mind won't understand. They didn't charge. They circled, moving at full gallop, hanging off the sides of their horses, firing arrows from under the necks of their mounts. I emptied my revolver 6 times, and I don't think I hit a single one. They stayed just at the edge of effective range, moving like water, always flowing to wherever we weren't looking. We lost 7 men in 20 minutes and never got close enough to one of them to see his face clearly. Von Rothenburg pressed for details. How was their accuracy while firing from horseback? McClure's laugh held no humor whatsoever. You're thinking about accuracy wrong. A Prussian cavalry trooper, he's trained to charge in formation, fire a carbine from a standing horse, maybe get off 2 shots before drawing his saber. These Comanche, they're firing 20 arrows in the time your cavalryman loads once, and they're doing it at full gallop, from under the horse, while changing directions. I watched one warrior put 3 arrows into a target the size of a man's chest from 100 yards away, while his horse was running full speed. The arrows hit so close together you could cover all 3 impact points with your hand. The Prussian officer began conducting his own observations, timing how long it took trained American cavalry to perform basic maneuvers compared to the accounts of Comanche tactics. The disparities were staggering. A cavalry trooper needed approximately 8 seconds to reload his single-shot carbine while stationary. Comanche warriors could fire arrows continuously, while moving at speeds von Rothenburg clocked at over 30 miles per hour across rough terrain. His journal entries became increasingly technical, filled with diagrams and calculations that attempted to quantify what seemed impossible. On November 23rd, von Rothenburg received permission to interview a captured Comanche warrior being held at the fort. The man was perhaps 25 years old, wounded during a raid, and facing execution. Through a translator, von Rothenburg asked him about Comanche military training. The warrior's response, recorded phonetically in the journal before being translated, would haunt the German officer for the rest of his life. You ask when we begin training for war. We begin when we can walk. By age 4, a Comanche boy can ride. By 6, he can stay on a horse at full gallop. By 8, he can shoot a bow from horseback. By 12, he has killed his first buffalo from the back of a running horse. By 15, he is ready for war. You German soldiers, you train for 2 years and think yourselves warriors. We train our entire lives. The horse is not a tool we use. The horse is part of our body. When you see us fight, you think you see 50 men. You are wrong. You see 50 centaurs. You cannot defeat what you do not understand. Von Rothenburg wrote that night with trembling hands. His elegant Gothic script became hurried, almost frantic. I have made a terrible miscalculation. The Comanche are not undisciplined raiders. They are the most disciplined light cavalry force currently operating anywhere in the world. Their training regimen would break Prussian cavalry officers. Their tactical flexibility exceeds anything I have seen in European warfare. A Uhlan regiment requires supply trains, remounts, ammunition wagons, field kitchens, medical support. A Comanche war party requires horses and arrows. They can cover 100 miles in a day, fight a battle, and disappear into terrain where our cavalry cannot follow. I do not believe any European military force could successfully campaign against them in their territory with current tactics and technology. December brought the incident that would occupy 30 pages of von Rothenburg's journal, and fundamentally alter his understanding of indigenous warfare. A combined force of United States Army cavalry and Texas Rangers, over 200 men, launched a punitive expedition against a Comanche band reported to be camped near the Pedernales River. Von Rothenburg accompanied the force as an observer, riding alongside Major Robert Mitchell, a veteran of the Mexican War who commanded the cavalry detachment. The expedition moved with what Mitchell considered appropriate caution, scouts ranging ahead, flankers protecting the column's sides. They found the Comanche camp on the third day, a cluster of lodges in a river valley that seemed to offer no defensive advantages. Mitchell deployed his forces in a textbook encirclement, cavalry on the wings, Rangers holding the center, cutting off all obvious escape routes. Von Rothenburg positioned himself with the command group on a rise overlooking the valley, ready to observe what he expected would be a decisive engagement. What happened next defied every principle of military science von Rothenburg had ever studied. As Mitchell's forces began their advance, the Comanche camp appeared to explode into motion. Warriors emerged from the lodges already mounted, already armed, moving with a coordination that suggested they had known the soldiers were coming long before the encirclement was complete. But instead of attempting to break through the weakest point in the line, which von Rothenburg had identified as the natural tactical choice, the Comanche did something incomprehensible. They divided into 3 groups and charged directly at the strongest points of the American formation. Von Rothenburg watched through his field glass as 50 warriors galloped straight at a line of over 80 dismounted Rangers, the most heavily armed section of the American force. It appeared to be suicide. The Rangers opened fire at 200 yards, a ragged volley that should have devastated the charging warriors. Von Rothenburg saw at least 3 horses fall. The Comanche line never wavered. At 100 yards, the Rangers fired again, more organized this time. More horses went down. Some warriors fell, but others simply leaped from their dying mounts onto spare horses, running alongside them, never breaking stride. At 50 yards, something impossible happened. The Comanche charge split like water hitting a rock, warriors peeling left and right with such precision that von Rothenburg initially thought they had rehearsed the maneuver. The Rangers, anticipating a collision, began to draw pistols and knives for close combat. Instead, the Comanche warriors swept past both flanks of the Ranger line, firing arrows from ranges so close that von Rothenburg could hear the impacts over the sound of gunfire. In his journal that night, von Rothenburg attempted to describe what he had witnessed. The Comanche warriors achieved something I did not think possible with cavalry. They executed a feigned charge that drew concentrated fire, then utilized the momentum of their approach to sweep the flanks at point-blank range before the defenders could reorient. The timing required is extraordinary. A fraction of a second too early, and the maneuver fails, exposing them to enfilade fire. A fraction too late, and the charge becomes a genuine collision that negates their mobility advantage. They threaded a needle at 30 miles per hour while under concentrated rifle fire. I have never seen Prussian cavalry attempt anything remotely similar, and I do not believe they could execute it successfully if they tried. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, the American force had suffered 18 dead and 32 wounded. The Comanche had lost perhaps 12 warriors. They had also successfully evacuated their entire camp, including women, children, elderly, and all their possessions, while conducting a fighting retreat against a numerically superior force equipped with modern firearms. Von Rothenburg spent the evening walking the battlefield with a surveyor's chain, measuring distances and angles, trying to understand the geometry of what had occurred. Major Mitchell was less analytical in his assessment. Standing beside his exhausted men, he told von Rothenburg something that would be quoted extensively in later military studies. "Sir, You asked me earlier this week how the United States plans to secure this territory. I will tell you honestly, I do not know. We have better weapons. We have more men. We have supply lines and forts and artillery. But these Comanche, they have something we cannot replicate. They have been bred to this land, trained to this warfare, shaped by generations of conflict into perfect instruments of mounted combat. Our cavalry learns to ride. They are born riding. Our soldiers learn to shoot. They learn to shoot while being born. If I had to face a Comanche war band or a regiment of French cavalry, I would choose the French without hesitation, because at least I understand how the French fight. Von Rothenburg's journal entries from December through March became increasingly obsessive in their detail. He attended every briefing, interviewed every survivor of Comanche raids, collected every scrap of information about their tactics, organization, and capabilities. He sketched Comanche arrows, measuring their length and examining their construction. He timed how long it took various soldiers to reload different firearms and compared those figures to estimates of Comanche rate of fire. He drew elaborate tactical diagrams attempting to model Comanche battle formations and movement patterns. On January 15, 1844, he wrote an entry that would become famous among military historians who later studied his journals. I have been trained in the Prussian system, which prides itself on the scientific study of warfare. We reduce battle to mathematics, to calculations of force ratios and movement rates, to logistics and supply chains. The Comanche have no such system. They do not write military manuals. They do not graduate from academies. Yet they have achieved what our system strives for and rarely reaches: perfect unity between warrior and weapon, between tactic and terrain, between intent and execution. They are not better than us because they are savage. They are better than us because they are more disciplined, more dedicated, and more completely adapted to their form of warfare than any European soldier is adapted to his. In February, von Rothenburg received news that would cut short his American sojourn. His father had died in Berlin, and family obligations required his return to Prussia. Before leaving, he requested one final interview with Colonel Harrison. The two men met in Harrison's office on a cold evening, sharing whiskey from the colonel's private stock. Von Rothenburg asked the question that had been building in his mind for months. "Colonel, in your assessment, can the United States military defeat the Comanche?" Harrison stared into his glass for a long moment before answering. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of 6 years watching men die on this frontier. "Defeat them? Yes. Eventually. But not the way you're thinking. We won't beat them in battle. We'll beat them the way empires always beat warriors. We'll kill their buffalo. We'll take their land inch by inch. We'll make treaties we have no intention of keeping. We'll introduce disease. We'll starve them, displace them, break them culturally before we ever break them militarily. In a straight fight, man for man, warrior for warrior, they're better than us. They'll always be better than us. But we have something they don't. We have the luxury of losing battles and still winning the war." Von Rothenburg's final entry from Fort Martin Scott, dated March 2, 1844, contained a prophecy that would prove chillingly accurate. "I leave this frontier with profound respect for the Comanche people and profound sadness for their inevitable fate. They have created a military system perfectly adapted to these plains, a culture that produces warriors of exceptional skill and courage. But perfection in adaptation can become a trap. The world is changing in ways that will render their advantages obsolete. The repeating rifle, the railroad, the telegraph, all these technologies will shift the calculus of frontier warfare. In 20 years, perhaps 30, the Comanche Empire will be a memory, But the principles I have observed here, the lessons about mobile warfare, combined arms tactics, and the importance of training, these will endure. I suspect that military theorists a century from now will still study what these warriors accomplished. The journals ended there, or so historians believed. Von Rothenburg returned to Prussia, eventually rising to the rank of general, and died in 1879. His Comanche journals were preserved by his family but remained unpublished, considered too controversial for their sympathetic portrayal of indigenous warriors. The collection was donated to a private military library in Munich in 1923, where they gathered dust for decades, occasionally consulted by researchers, but never fully analyzed. Then, in 2015, during a routine cataloging project, a librarian named Dr. Friedrich Hartmann discovered something extraordinary. Behind the final page of von Rothenburg's last journal entry, hidden in a specially constructed pocket in the leather binding, were 32 additional pages. They had been sealed so carefully that generations of archivists had never noticed them. The paper was different from the rest of the journal, thicker and treated with some kind of preservative. The handwriting was von Rothenburg's, but the tone was radically different. These were not the careful observations of a military professional. These were the frightened confessions of a man who had seen something that shattered his understanding of reality. The hidden pages began with an entry dated April 9, 1844, written aboard a ship bound for Europe. I did not tell Colonel Harrison the truth about why I am leaving early. I told him my father's death required my return. That is partially accurate. But the real reason I am fleeing, and I use that word deliberately, is what happened in the cave near Devil's Sinkhole. I fear I will never sleep peacefully again. I fear that what I witnessed was not meant for European eyes. Most of all, I fear that my presence there violated something ancient and powerful, and that I may have brought a curse home with me that will haunt my bloodline forever. Dr. Hartmann spent 3 months authenticating the hidden pages, subjecting them to every test available. The paper dated to the 1840s. The ink composition matched samples from von Rothenburg's known journals. The handwriting, analyzed by forensic document examiners, was unquestionably the Prussian officers', though written under evident stress. The content, however, defied easy categorization. According to the hidden pages, in late February of 1844, von Rothenburg had been approached by a man who identified himself only as Samuel Two Rivers. The man claimed to be of mixed Comanche and Spanish heritage, educated in Mexican mission schools, but raised in Comanche society. He told von Rothenburg that certain elders had been watching the Prussian officer, noting his respectful curiosity about Comanche ways. They had decided to show him something no outsider had ever seen, something that would explain why the Comanche were more than merely skilled warriors. Von Rothenburg initially dismissed this as a potential trap, but Two Rivers provided information about Comanche tactical deployments that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of their operations. Against his better judgment, intrigued by the possibility of gaining unprecedented insight, the Prussian officer agreed to meet Two Rivers at a specified location outside the fort at midnight on February 28th. The entry describing that night filled 10 pages of tight, hurried script. Von Rothenburg and Two Rivers rode south through darkness, following trails that seemed invisible even in the moonlight. They traveled for what von Rothenburg estimated was 4 hours, covering perhaps 30 miles through terrain that became increasingly rough and isolated. As dawn approached, they arrived at a limestone escarpment riddled with caves and sinkholes. Two Rivers led him to a specific cave entrance, marked with symbols that von Rothenburg did not recognize. Inside, waiting in a cavern lit by a central fire, were 7 Comanche men. Von Rothenburg described them as elderly, but possessed of a physical presence that made age seem irrelevant. They wore ceremonial dress that incorporated elements he had never seen in his months on the frontier, intricate beadwork that seemed to incorporate patterns that hurt his eyes if he looked at them too long. Through two rivers, who translated, one of the elders spoke. "You have watched us with respect. You have tried to understand. Most white men see only what they want to see, savages or demons or obstacles to be removed. You have seen warriors. You have seen skill. You have asked the right questions. Now we will show you why you asked the wrong fundamental question. You asked how we became such skilled fighters. You should have asked what made fighting skills necessary." What followed was a ceremony that von Rothenburg struggled to describe even in his private journal. The elders burned substances he could not identify, creating smoke that made the cave walls seem to breathe. They chanted in a language that Two Rivers said was older than Comanche, older than any of the Plains tribes, a language passed down from peoples who lived on these lands when the world was young and different things walked under the stars. Von Rothenburg wrote that the smoke visions came gradually, building in intensity until he could no longer distinguish between what he was seeing with his eyes and what was being projected directly into his mind. He saw the plains as they had been thousands of years earlier, populated by creatures that should not have existed outside of fever dreams or ancient mythology, great beasts that were neither buffalo nor any animal he recognized, beings that walked upright but were not human, tall and angular with eyes that reflected firelight like a wolf's. The elders explained, through Two Rivers, that the Comanche and other plains peoples were not merely survivors. They were guardians. Their mastery of warfare, their supernatural skills on horseback, their ability to appear and disappear like smoke. These were not just cultural developments. They were the result of a compact made in antiquity, with forces that inhabited the plains long before humans arrived. In exchange for protecting certain boundaries, maintaining certain sacred sites, and preventing certain knowledge from spreading beyond the plains, these ancient forces had granted the plains peoples abilities that transcended normal human limits. Von Rothenburg's rational mind rebelled against what he was being told, but the visions continued. He saw Comanche warriors not as he had observed them in battle, but as they truly were when the ancient compact was invoked. He saw them transform during combat, not in body, but in nature, becoming something that existed partially in the physical world and partially in some other dimension. This, the elders said, was why bullets so often missed them at ranges where hitting should have been simple, why arrows fired from impossible angles found their marks, why they seemed to know where enemies would be before the enemies knew themselves. They were not fighting in 3 dimensions like European soldiers. They were fighting in 5. The Prussian officer wrote that he lost consciousness at some point during the ceremony. When he woke, it was late afternoon, and he was lying outside the cave entrance with Two Rivers sitting nearby. Von Rothenburg's first coherent thought was that he had been drugged, that everything he had experienced was hallucination. But Two Rivers anticipated this doubt. The guide reached into a leather pouch and produced an object that von Rothenburg described with trembling words. It was an arrowhead, but not like any he had seen in his months collecting examples of Comanche weaponry. The material was a black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The edges were sharper than any flint he had examined, sharp enough that when he tested it against his thumb, it cut through his skin without him feeling anything until blood welled from the wound. Most disturbing were the markings etched into its surface, symbols that resembled nothing in any written language von Rothenburg knew, yet somehow conveyed meaning directly to his mind when he looked at them. Two Rivers spoke words that von Rothenburg recorded phonetically before translating. This is from before the horse people came, from before the Spanish came, from before the ice retreated. This is proof that the story I told you is true. The elders give this to you as a warning and a gift. A warning because your people will come to these plains in greater numbers. They will try to take everything. They will succeed in taking much. But they will never take what truly matters, because they will never know it exists. The sacred places will remain hidden. The compact will endure. And those who violate what should not be violated will face consequences that cannot be explained in any report to any government. The gift is knowledge. You now know what the Comanche really are. You know why they cannot truly be defeated, only displaced. You know that there are older powers in this world than European armies and American expansion. Take this knowledge home with you. Remember it when your generals plan their campaigns. Remember it when your politicians draw their maps. The plains remember everything, and what the plains remember, they collect on, eventually. Von Rothenburg rode back to Fort Martin Scott in silence, the black arrowhead hidden in his coat pocket. He told no one what had happened, not even Colonel Harrison. He accelerated his departure plans, citing urgent family business. On the ship to Europe, he wrote the hidden account, sealing it carefully behind the last page of his official journal. He included a note explaining that he did this to prevent his descendants from thinking him mad, but also to preserve a truth that he believed would become important in the future. The arrowhead traveled with him to Prussia. According to the hidden pages, von Rothenburg conducted careful experiments with it over the following months. He discovered that the stone could cut through steel with minimal pressure, that it never dulled despite extensive use, that prolonged exposure to it caused vivid dreams of the plains, so intense that he would wake disoriented, believing himself to be riding across Texas grasslands rather than sleeping in his Berlin home. He eventually locked it in a special case lined with lead, which seemed to reduce its effects. Von Rothenburg's military career flourished. He became an expert on cavalry tactics, publishing influential papers that borrowed heavily from his observations of Comanche warfare, though he carefully attributed these innovations to his own theoretical insights rather than indigenous sources. During the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, he commanded a cavalry brigade that employed modified versions of Comanche tactical principles, achieving remarkable success. Prussian lancers learned to execute feigned charges and flanking maneuvers at speed, tactics that baffled French forces accustomed to more conventional cavalry doctrine. But the hidden journal entries from these years, written sporadically when von Rothenburg felt compelled to document his experiences, told a darker story. He wrote of nightmares that increased in frequency and intensity, dreams of pursuing and being pursued across endless plains, of voices speaking in that ancient language from the cave, conveying messages he could understand but not consciously remember upon waking, of a growing certainty that he was being watched by something that existed just outside the normal range of human perception. In 1876, von Rothenburg received news that shocked him profoundly. Fort Martin Scott had been abandoned. The Comanche Wars were entering their final phase. Tribes that had once controlled the southern plains were being forced onto reservations. The buffalo herds were being systematically slaughtered, with hunters killing millions of animals and leaving the carcasses to rot, deliberately destroying the Comanche food supply and way of life. It was happening exactly as Colonel Harrison had predicted, attrition and displacement rather than military victory. Von Rothenburg's entry from that month was bitter and prescient. They are doing what empires do. They could not defeat the warriors, so they are killing the world the warriors inhabit. In 20 years, scholars will write that the Comanche were conquered by superior technology and numbers. They will be wrong. The Comanche are being conquered by the deliberate destruction of an ecosystem. Future historians will call this progress. I call it necessary evil. which makes it no less evil. But I fear, based on what I learned in that cave, that this displacement will have consequences beyond what anyone anticipates. Ancient compacts, if they exist, do not simply dissolve when one party is removed. The obligations remain. The guardianship continues. And if the guardians are no longer able to maintain the boundaries they were charged with protecting, then what has been kept out may find its way in. The final hidden entry was dated March 15, 1879, just 2 weeks before von Rothenburg's death from what medical records list as a sudden heart failure. His handwriting had deteriorated significantly, and the text wandered between German and phrases in that unknown language from the cave, as if the two were becoming confused in his mind. The dreams have become continuous. I no longer know if I am sleeping or waking. I see the plains constantly now, overlaid on whatever room I occupy. The boundary between here and there has dissolved. 2 rivers came to me last night, though he must be dead by now. An old man when I met him 35 years ago. He said the arrowhead is calling me home, that the compact requires all who learn of it to eventually return to the plains, in body or in spirit. He said my time in Berlin was borrowed time, grace period granted to deliver the warning to European powers, though I never delivered it to anyone but this hidden journal. He said it is time to pay the debt. I feel something vast approaching from the west, crossing the Atlantic like a storm front that exists in dimensions we cannot measure. The Comanche have been broken, the buffalo nearly extinct, the sacred sites violated by settlers who have no idea what they are trampling. The guardianship has been disrupted, and disruption of such ancient arrangements never occurs without consequence. I fear, and I write this in my final lucid moments, that my generation has made a terrible mistake. We measured progress in railroads and telegraph lines and acres under cultivation. We never stopped to ask what we might be unleashing by destroying systems we did not understand. If whoever reads this thinks me mad, so be it. But I carried that black arrowhead across an ocean, and it carried something with it, some fragment of the plains, some seed of the ancient compact. And I fear it has taken root here in ways I am only beginning to understand. I fear it will spread. I fear that the very forces the Comanche were charged with holding back may now ride east with European colonization of their lands. Invisible passengers on the ships and trains, slipping through gaps in a barrier that took millennia to establish and only decades to break. I fear, God help me, I fear we have won a continent and lost something far more valuable without ever knowing it existed. The entry ended there, trailing off mid-sentence. Von Rothenburg died in his sleep 2 weeks later, at age 63. The family buried him with military honors in Berlin. The arrowhead was not found among his effects. His widow reported that his final words, spoken in delirium, were in a language she did not recognize, but that filled her with inexplicable dread. Dr. Hartmann's publication of the hidden pages in 2016 caused a sensation in academic circles. Anthropologists, military historians, and archaeologists debated their authenticity and meaning. Some dismissed them as the fantasies of a man suffering from undiagnosed mental illness or the effects of frontier hardship. Others argued they represented a sophisticated psychological breakdown resulting from cultural collision and the guilt of witnessing genocide. A small minority suggested they should be taken seriously as documentation of knowledge systems that Western science had categorically refused to acknowledge. But the most disturbing development came from an unexpected source. In 2017, a team of researchers from Texas State University conducted an archaeological survey near Devil's Sinkhole, using von Rothenburg's directions from the hidden pages to locate the cave where the ceremony supposedly occurred. They found it, matching his description precisely, including symbols carved near the entrance that resembled those von Rothenburg had sketched in his journal. Inside the cave, they discovered evidence of human occupation spanning thousands of years, and in a chamber that matched von Rothenburg's description of where the ceremony took place, they found something that none of them could explain. 7 stone seats arranged around a fire pit, and in the ash of that pit, carbon dated to approximately 1844, they found a piece of fabric. Chemical analysis confirmed it was consistent with Prussian military uniform material from that period, but more disturbing was what they found embedded in the fabric. A button. And on that button, still faintly visible, was the insignia of a Prussian cavalry officer. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Sarah Whitehorse, who identified herself as having Comanche ancestry, made a statement that was recorded but never officially published in the team's findings. "We found the cave. We found proof von Rothenburg was there. But we also found proof of something else. The chamber extends farther back than we initially thought. We used ground-penetrating radar and found additional passages, going deep into the earth, following patterns that seemed deliberately constructed. We found chambers that shouldn't exist according to any geological processes we understand. And in those deep chambers, the radar picked up anomalies, objects or entities that returned signals inconsistent with stone or empty space. We terminated the survey after 3 days. 2 of my team members became violently ill. All of us experienced phenomena we cannot explain or publish without destroying our careers. All I will say officially is that von Rothenburg may have been reporting what he genuinely experienced rather than what he imagined. And if that is true, then we have disturbed something that was better left alone." The cave was quietly closed to further research. Official reports cited structural instability and protected Native American cultural sites. But researchers who attempted to follow up found their permit requests denied without explanation. The Texas State University team dispersed, most moving to different institutions, none willing to discuss their findings in detail. In 2019, something strange began happening in the region around Devil's Sinkhole. Local ranchers reported livestock dying in patterns reminiscent of 19th-century Comanche raid descriptions, though no human attackers were ever seen. Hikers reported feeling watched in the hills, hearing sounds like distant drumming that had no source. And 7 different people, all of them descended from German immigrants who settled the area in the 19th century, reported identical nightmares, riding across plains that extended forever in all directions, pursued by warriors made of shadow and starlight, knowing that they were paying for debts inherited from ancestors they never knew. The nightmares continue today. Are these merely psychological phenomena, collective guilt manifesting across generations? Or did von Rothenburg's violation of the ancient ceremony in 1844 truly open a doorway that has never fully closed? Did the displacement of the Comanche guardians truly disrupt something that had maintained balance for thousands of years? The journals suggest an answer, but it is one that requires us to accept that our understanding of history is incomplete, that there are forces in this world operating on timescales and according to rules that our modern minds struggle to comprehend, that the conquest of the American frontier may have been more costly than any history book acknowledges, with debts coming due in ways we still do not recognize. Von Rothenburg's final words haunt those who study his hidden journals. "We have won a continent and lost something far more valuable without ever knowing it existed." Perhaps the real lesson is not about Comanche military prowess or European military doctrine. Perhaps it is about hubris, about the dangers of destroying what we do not understand. about the reality that some guardianships, once broken, leave the world more vulnerable than we can imagine. In this moment of uncertainty, when the veil between what we know and what we fear grows thin, there is only one true protection. Only one fortress that cannot be breached by forces ancient or modern. That fortress is faith. The shadow warriors that ride through dreams, the ancient compacts violated, the debts inherited across generations, all of these pale before the light of divine truth. Whatever walks the plains, whatever slipped through broken barriers, whatever was unleashed when the guardianship failed, it cannot touch those who place their trust in God Almighty and in His Son, Jesus Christ. Turn to Him now. Accept His protection, for in a world where ancient powers stir and inherited curses pass through bloodlines, only the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ can break chains that human hands forged but cannot loose. Pray for protection. Pray for discernment. Pray that the debts of the past are paid not through suffering, but through redemption. And pray that whatever von Rothenburg saw in that cave, whatever truth the Comanche elders revealed to him, whatever forces were displaced when an empire fell, that they might be quieted by faith stronger than any compact made before the ice retreated. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, may you find shelter from the shadows that ride out of history. May you find peace in the only refuge that has never failed. Trust in God. Follow Jesus Christ, for He alone is the light that no darkness, ancient or modern, can overcome. This is not merely wisdom, this is survival. This is the only truth that matters when the plains remember and the debts come due.